Hello and welcome to the 6th installment of the Shop Made Tools and Upgrades video series. On one of my other videos I had a comment from Nick D, and Nick was trying to find some information on welding tables because he was going to build one this year. And he said he was interested in the multi-function aspect of my welding table. I'd always intended to make a Shop Made Tools video about my welding table here, and with Nick's comment I've decided to do that now. This table was built just before we had the issues with the pandemic, so back in early 2020. Like Nick, I was out there on YouTube watching videos of welding tables and fabrication tables being built. And I don't know how many videos I watched, probably 30 or 40 videos, all different tables being built by different people. And I noted down all of the good features that I wanted to include in the table that I was building. So a lot of the features that you see on this table of mine, are from other YouTubers who have posted videos out there as well. Let's start with the tabletop here. So for a welding table or fabrication table, or even a workbench, you really want a nice flat surface. And as you can see, I've actually still got the markings that I drew out for my stand that I built for my wood lathe. So it's really good to fabricate on this surface here because it's nice and flat. So this is a piece of 10mm thick steel plate, and it's 1200 by 1230 in dimension. Now the hole pattern that you see here is not actually symmetrical. So these holes here are 190mm this way and 245mm this way. And I had to do it that way because of some of the structure underneath, because the table has a plasma cutting drawer down the other end there, which we'll talk about in a minute. So I had to make sure that I wasn't going to drill holes into any of that mechanical apparatus. Now these holes are 16mm in diameter. I've had them on this table for quite some time now, but I used the table probably for a good year before I put the holes in here. The holes are very, very useful, and there are enough holes on the table here, so I didn't really need them spaced closer together at all. Now I drilled these holes with a 16mm drill bit. Obviously I started small and worked my way up, and I did intend to build a mag drill to drill these holes, but I didn't get round to it, and that's why the bench never had holes for about a year. So how did I get the holes straight? Well, I used this piece of, it's about 40mm by 40mm solid bar, and I drilled some holes in the drill press here, the smaller holes, and then working my way up to the 16mm hole. And I used this as a guide, and there were a lot of holes here, so it did get a bit worn out, so I did the same down the other end there as well. So that's one way you can drill your holes and try and get them straight. If you don't use a guide and you're just standing on the bench for putting a lot of weight on a drill, you could be drilling the hole a little bit crooked. So I'm fairly confident that the holes are pretty straight up and down. So down at this end here, there is a slide that comes out. You might have seen this on one of my other videos. So this slide or extension comes out, and I've drawn some marks on here where to stop so we don't pull it right out and end up on your toes. At that extension there, the full length of the table from the far right to the end of the slide there is 2 meters and 230mm. And that has come in very useful in some of the projects, so I'm glad I put that feature in. So let's take a look at the end here. I welded some bars along just under the plate there, and that's where I can put all my clamps and vice grips. And below that you'll see another bar where I've got my pliers, and on the right hand side there's a couple of hammers and things there. And below that is actually a sort of a tray part of the bench, and there's a lot of stuff under there. And I haven't done any super cleaning up to make it look nice. This is how it is, and there's a whole lot of junk under there, but I do use a lot of the stuff that is under there, so it's not sort of just sitting there collecting dust. On top of the bench here on the right hand side, you can see my solid tube vise that I built. We'll talk a bit more about that later. And right at the bottom there, I've made it high so that I can store things under the bench as well. So I've got some blocks of wood on the right hand side that are useful for when you don't want to bash something with a hammer. You want to use a bit of wood to not wreck it or ding it. And there's a little step thing down there. I'm quite short, so when I need to get steel from the rafters where I store it, I need another 8 inches of height. So we just headed around to the left here, and again you can probably see more what's under the bench there without all the clamps and stuff in the way. You can see I've got some magnetic squares in that I use for welding, and there's a plate under there where they just stick onto when you're not using them. Now right at the bottom you can see some wheels and some threaded rods there. I saw this on one of the videos when I was researching, and it looked like a really good idea, and it is a really good idea. So basically you screw down those bolts, and that screws down those wheels and actually lifts the table up. And this table is really heavy, so if you want to move it, you just screw those down, lifts the table up, and then you can pull it round to wherever you want to put it. And then you undo those bolts and the wheels will come back up and the table will sit on its feet again. And like anything that I make, this table has adjustable feet. My garage here, the concrete in here is not absolutely flat like glass. There's little dips and valleys and stuff. So any tables or benches I make, I always make adjustable feet. These swing out drawers are another idea that I got from someone else who made a video. These are really useful. So I've got pens and stuff in the first one, I've got punches and knives in the second one, and some measuring equipment in the third one. Very useful to have that close to where you're working. I can just reach over and grab whatever I need out of these drawers. Now these drawers were really easy to make. All they are is a bit of 75mm square tubing, and I've just got the cut-off wheel and cut down each side until you just have kind of a U shape, and then I've welded an end in both ends there, and they're just bolted on with one bolt so that they swivel and they close up. And I made some stainless steel knobs for them as well. This is another really great idea that without the research I probably wouldn't have thought about this. So now we're on I call it the back side of the bench, because I do most of my work on the opposite side. There's a bar that runs across the middle there, and there's some bit of small and large box section welded onto it, and I've put screwdrivers in the small one, and I have capacity to put larger items in the larger tube sections there. And this piece with the silver handle here, this is actually a plasma cutting table that I built into the bench. So another idea that I picked up from one of the videos I watched. Let me pull that out and show you how it works. So on the left hand side of the bench, we'll get round there in a minute, there's a little lever there that I pull out, and then I can pull the table out. And that lever is spring loaded. It pushes into a detent, and this is now locked, so it won't go back in unless you pull that lever out again. So as I said, this is a plasma cutting table which is built in, and the slats here are all replaceable. So that's 25mm or 1 inch by 3mm. I think that's about an 1/8. And that just fits in there, so they can be replaced if you need to replace them when they get burnt out. And if we just pan down a bit, it has a closed bottom under here, and it's hinged, and there's some latches here and one down the far end, and I can undo these latches and let all the slag come out, and get rid of that so it's not sitting in the tray all the time. So to put the table back in, we just pull the lever out. And now that's all locked in place there. Now this is the last side, and I don't have much room here because I'm up against the garage wall, so there might be a couple of different angles on this. So the plasma table's on this side here, and that's that lever that I made up. So it's just spring loaded and it just fits into a detent or hole, and that locks the table in place, and then when I pull it out I can pull that table out. So you can see there's a few of these spikes that stick out to put your flap discs and your cutting wheels and grinding wheels on. There's a plate down here, and that's been cut out so that the grinders can be hung on there. I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. And there are some other hooks down the bottom here for more grinding discs or your tools, etc., to take the cutting wheels off and grinding wheels off. So here's a shot from another angle. You can see there's a square piece here with a screw in it. That's a receiver that I had a vise mounted to a piece of steel that fitted in the hole here, and I could lock it down to the table. That worked really, really well, but I broke that vise, and that's the reason why I actually started to build this tube vise here. So this is obsolete now. I just left it there. I had to cut a little bit away to make room for this. And talking about that, let's just change the angle a little bit. So there's the vise from this angle. This is the tube vise. Built based on Jason from Fireball Tool. He built one of these tube vices, and I sort of built it similar to how he did it. This is a very useful vise. I've got a video playlist on the build for this, so if you want to see how it was built, certainly have a look at that. I'll leave the link in the description. This vise swivels, so it's got these little slots here. It can swivel around, be locked up in a different position. And it's also got a tilting table here. So again, that's another Fireball Tool idea that I've used for this setup as well. And it is very, very useful. So instead of just having your vise spinning or rotating on a horizontal axis, you can then loosen off this shoulder bolt, and then that vise can now come up and be locked in position there. Just move that around a bit. So now you have, if we open this out, basically a throatless vise. So I can put anything very long in here, all the way down to the floor. So very useful. And I've used this tilting mechanism a lot. And it also allows you to bring your work down a lot lower too. So when the vise is in the normal position, if the work is too high and you're up the top there trying to grind it, or whatever you're trying to do, you can actually swivel this around so the jaws come down the bottom here, and now your work is down at a lower point. And I've used it in that position quite a bit as well. That brings us back to the beginning here. One thing I didn't mention on that first part of this video is I have these rubber mats on the floor. As I mentioned, I spend most of my time at this end of the workbench. All my projects pretty much start on the workbench here. So I use these rubber mats because it's a lot easier on your body than standing on the hard concrete. I actually use the rubber mats on my lathe. There's one on the mill and in other places as well. I just bought these from our local Bunnings store, so that's a hardware store, probably a bit like your Home Depot type stores. But for the sake of $25, $30 or something, I think they're great. So there it is. That's pretty much all of the features in the table. I hope that does help other people that want to build one of these welding tables or fabrication tables. Before we go, maybe I'll just mention, if I did this again, what I would change, or what I would add, or what I wouldn't do. The first thing is this lip here that goes pretty much all around the table. So there's a bit of tubing down here where this goes into, and the table overhangs this about 25 millimeters, about an inch. And I find that particularly when I did not have the holes in the top, I was clamping stuff along the edges all the time. And I found that, you know, the clamps didn't really fall off, but I wasn't happy with the way they were being clamped. And it's because it's not, you know, sticking out far enough here. So if I did the table again, I would just make these tubes here in a little bit, probably another inch at both ends, and probably the sides as well. And that will give you more of the table edge to clamp onto. I mean, I can put a clamp right under here, but I don't want to put too much pressure because this is a hollow tube where this piece fits inside, and I don't want to go crushing it and then having the slider jam up there. So best to just clamp on the edge here. The second thing are the adjustable casters here. When I watched the video of the other person who put them on his bench, and he demonstrated winding them down and moving the bench around, and it looked so easy, you know, I thought that was a really good idea. I spent a lot of time making this square up out of flat bar and filing it out and making it fit this table leg, you know, and there's 4 of them to do. I have actually never used this. I've only used it to bring the table into the position it's in, and the table's been here for, you know, 2 years and has never moved. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying if I built it again, I wouldn't go to the effort to put all that stuff on because I never use it. Now, if you have a smaller workspace and you need to move the table around, then, you know, it's going to be a good idea to do that. If I didn't have this on here and I needed to move the table, you know, I have hydraulic jacks and things like that which I can put under the bench and jack it up and move it around. I mean, it's there if I, you know, need to use it, which is good, but it was a lot of work for something that I don't use. The third thing that I wanted to mention was this piece here where I hang the grinders. I don't actually use it, as I hang my grinders on a ladder that's on the wall behind the camera here. I just find it a lot easier and a lot less getting tangled up with cords and stuff like that. I mean, this is a good idea if you've got a couple of grinders, I guess, and you can put one at each end. But I have 5 or 6 grinders or various different attachments on them. It just saves me changing out the attachment each time. But what I do lack on this side here is probably these things here. So, you know, I'd put more of these in for your cut-off discs and your grinding wheels and your flat discs and your wire wheels and tools and all that sort of stuff. I find that these things can get full. This one is probably a little bit empty, but, you know, you can put other things on there, but then you have to pull those off to get to the ones at the back that you want. So probably more of these sticking out, a few more of these, and I wouldn't have even put that plate on there, and that would make it easy to get underneath. And the last thing I wanted to mention were these holes here. Now, I find the holes really, really useful, and as I mentioned before, I have plenty on here. You know, I'm not running out of, you know, I don't need a hole right here in the middle. So the spacing is fine for me, but I guess there are some pros and cons. The pros are you've got holes and you can put your clamps in and clamp anywhere on the table, you know, so you're not just confined to around the edges there. But the cons are that you can lose things down here, and I have lost things down here. You know, I have the tray underneath, so most of the time if I fish around long enough, I can find the little screw that fell down or you know, whatever fell down there. The other thing was more of a concern. I do a lot of welding on here. You can see, you know, the template that I drew out for my A-frame for the wood lathe that I made in the last video. And I welded it in position here. So you can get sparks and things that go down. Now under the bench, it's mostly, you know, tools and things. So it's mostly metal down there. but I do have containers, plastic containers and stuff down there. And I always have it in the back of my head that, you know, there could be a little bit of slag that's bounced off and fallen down and is sitting in a plastic container and smouldering away there. I sometimes come out at night after I've shut down just to make sure that, you know, nothing's still burning there. And, you know, I haven't had any issues at this stage, you know, that's good, but it's always in the back of my head. So I think you know, if I did the bench again, I would still put the holes in. They are useful. It's just, you know, be a bit cautious, I guess, of welding sparks and stuff that go down there. That pretty much concludes this video on the welding bench that I built. So I hope that gives everyone, including Nick D, some information on what I did and the different features that I added. And I hope it helps Nick when he gets around to building his welding table. If you do like my videos, please click on the subscribe button and click on the bell if you want to get notified when I create new videos. Thanks for watching.